before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description.
Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast, brought to you by the Manchester Evening News. I'm Jack Flintham and I'm joined today, as always, by Steve Railston. Steve, how are we?
Not bad, thank you, Jack. The international break is over. I was just thinking, what's the most exciting thing I've done during the international break? And it was probably going around my friends for a dinner party last weekend. I'm getting old.
That sounds incredible.
But to be fair, I mean, his girlfriend, they put on a great spread. Homemade Asian food. It was. I think it was tiramisu homemade for dessert. So it was a good night. But maybe in years gone by, I would say, sex, drugs, and sausage rolls during the international break. But I'm getting older now.
Yeah, it is really a case of how you actually fill these weeks of the international break.
Have you done anything exciting?
Not a lot, to be honest. I think Christmas markets has been about as exciting as it's got for me.
I mean, I've put my foot down this year. I've said I'm not going to the Christmas markets. I just think
that's a bit Scrooge-like.
It's freezing cold. The tat's probably so expensive. It's £10 minimum. You're paying £20 for a hot chocolate. You have to take out a mortgage just to buy something from these Christmas markets. So I'll give them a miss and I'll stay warm.
Yeah, we ended up having breakfast at Federal. Not a plug, but if they want to sponsor the podcast, they can do. So didn't end up actually eating at any of the stalls. But yeah, the prices are pretty horrendous, aren't they? But as you say, we're out of the international break now. We don't have to spend our days going to the Christmas markets or shopping or dinner parties. We can get back down to the football. After the break, we'll preview Everton in a bit more detail. But first, we're going to kick off with some of the news that you may have missed during the international break. And we'll start with the more recent news. Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham revealed his plans for the Manchester region. Obviously, that's going to have some impact on United and the new stadium. Could you just tell us a bit more about that, please, Steve?
Yes, I'm not actually sure whether it was Wednesday or Thursday. I think it was Thursday. It was officially unveiled. Burnham's growth project, which essentially is going to be a huge boost to the region across the next 10 years. 1 billion worth of money is being invested. So basically, Greater Manchester's economic growth is outstripping the whole country with an annual rate of 3.1%. And Burnham has stated that every area of Manchester should benefit, not just obviously the very central parts. If you look around in the last 5-10 years, the landscape is completely changed in the city centre. Buildings are popping up left, right and centre. So there's huge growth in Manchester. And Burnham's essentially put together a package of £1 billion to spread that money around. And that includes some investment for the Old Trafford regeneration area. Now, the important part is that Burnham has obviously said a few times now that taxpayers' money won't be used for the stadium itself, but for the actual area around the stadium. That's going to bring benefits to the people in the area, to the city. So naturally, that will be public funding will be available for those aspects. And an initial commitment of £26 million was made for 382 new homes. Hopefully, some affordable homes are going to be built a lot in that number, as part of the Trafford development. So again, look, that's the area around Old Trafford. It's not money for the stadium itself, but if you think back to when the plans for the new stadium were unveiled in London at the start of this year in March, obviously some fantastic artist impressions of what the regeneration area could look like, and that is essentially for that. So there's going to be new flats, new homes. There's going to be room for business, for leisure. Manchester's such a vibrant city centre now. There's so much going on, and it's expanding. It's going out. Even in Salford, where I live, it's expanding over there across the river. So the benefits should be huge. And the club have understandably welcomed this investment. They've said it's great news, and it kind of aligns with their vision for how they see the area. But the important part is the stadium itself is obviously being put on pause. The design, Foster and Partners are obviously in charge of overseeing that, but it could be a little while until we actually see spades in the ground. But it's welcoming to see bits and bobs like this, because it's not just a stadium that's going to need built. There's infrastructure there. There's transport links. There's going to need be pubs and bars, for example. The area is going to look so different. I run around it all the time. It's my stomping ground, down the Quays, running around that way, down Salford, 3 mile, 4 mile run. So if you are a local runner in Media City, perhaps give us a wave. But the area will look so different in 10 years. It really will.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned there that there's going to be a few delays on putting spades in the ground and getting started with it. That's a bit to do with reaching agreement with the land that the stadium's footprint is going to be on, isn't it?
Yeah, so we discussed it, didn't we, a few weeks ago, with obviously Freightliner own the land behind Old Trafford, the rail yard, and that is key to the stadium, new stadium being built. The land is seen as crucial. Talks have been ongoing, and it was communicated last month that the club were optimistic of reaching a deal with Freightliner to acquire that land. Burnham, interestingly enough, has been asked about it himself, I think in the summer, and he said that compulsory purchase powers could be potentially used if both parties could not reach an agreement eventually. But last month there was obviously some encouraging noise coming out of the club that, again, that United were optimistic of securing that land. But Shazia Ratcliffe, when the plans were unveiled, obviously 100,000 seater, very exciting. It was great to see earlier this year. He said that it could be built by 2030, and that probably felt a little bit ambitious at the time. And now this year has gone on, I think it's looking more unlikely, because we're about to hit 2026. That's 4 years. Tottenham built their stadium in 4 years. But you'd have to have spades in the ground, you'd think, by at least by summer. Could I see that by summer? A lot would have to happen. And they've got to think of how to actually transport these parts for the new stadium as well. There's been some interesting snippets on how they might do that, because I think the parts for the stadium would be so big, they can't actually transport them on road and up the motorways. I think it'd actually have to come through the canal and transport the old school way on boats, just because of the size of the project. So there's a few different bits and pieces that need to be ironed out, and a huge part of that is the land behind the stadium. So much so that the designing of the stadium itself, as I said, has been paused, because there's no point of designing a stadium if you don't know what you've got to work with. So they need to reach an agreement to purchase this land sooner rather than later. But I guess they're in a difficult position, because Freightliner essentially hold the cards here. I think they have been overtaken. There was a takeover at their company, so perhaps the new investors will be more willing and more listening, more willing in negotiations, listening to the offers. So we'll have to just keep an eye on that one and see how that develops.
Yeah, and it's probably worth mentioning as well that if it isn't going to be 2030, United really want to get it done by 2035, don't they? When it's the Women's World Cup is kind of a big aim for the first major event to be hosted outside of United matches.
Yeah, that's been brought up a few times now, hasn't it? The 2035 Women's World Cup. And again, that would be huge for the area. It would bring commercial benefits. It'd be great for the stadium to host it, a real landmark event, something to be proud of. You'd be very disappointed, and something massively would have had to go wrong if it wasn't built by then. That is 10 years away, of course. I think it should be built by then. But when you look at it, I think 2030, it might be a little bit of a push, but hopefully we see some developments over the next few months, because I think that feels important if they do want to get the project on track and built by then. So it would be the 2030-31 season. So obviously it would start in August 2030. Then there's going to have to be progress made. And I think when the Carrington refurbishments were unveiled in August, obviously Ratcliffe had invested 50 million to improve the training facilities. He was very proud to say, people said it couldn't be done on time, but we've delivered this project and it's been delivered within budget. He opened his speech with that little snippet. So, look, I think Old Trafford will be more difficult. Naturally, United could control Carrington. They owned the premises. They had total control over that project. It's slightly different with a new stadium because of this land, and there's just so many moving parts at play.
Yeah, definitely. And just moving on away from the ground now, onto injury news. And obviously there's going to be big talking points. We haven't heard from Ruben Amorim yet, have we? He's speaking this afternoon, but we should be expecting further updates on Benjamin Sesko and Lisandro Martinez. Could you give us a bit more on that, please?
Yeah, as you've said, I mean, we'll just quickly talk about them now, but we're recording this podcast on the morning. It's currently 10 a.m. Amorim's due to speak at 1:15. So look, by the time you've listened to this podcast, if you come home from work and check Twitter or check wherever you get your news, hopefully it's the Manchester Evening News, you'll be able to read the better updates. Because at the moment we're only using the information that we have. It was communicated in the first week of the international break to us that Benjamin Sesko had scans at Carrington and that his knee injury was not expected to be serious. From what I've been told since, I believe that could be maybe up to 2 or 3 weeks on the sidelines. But again, we'll have to wait and see what Amorim says at his press conference. And then with Lisandro Martinez, he's been pictured again this week, just coming back from working with Argentina during the break. He's been pictured in first team training. Martinez obviously returned to full training earlier this month. He's been around the first team squad now for a few weeks. He was in kind of contention to be involved against Nottingham Forest, but Ruben Amorim said he wouldn't make it because obviously they're kind of carefully bringing him along and they don't want to take any risks. And it was the same case against Tottenham. So Martinez was absent there, which again wasn't a surprise. But because he's been in training for a few weeks now, and United give him the green light to travel and go see Argentina during the international break. So he went out there with someone from United's performance staff who chaperoned Martinez, make sure he wasn't being a naughty boy on international break. And the Argentina camp was in Europe, so it wasn't much travelling for Martinez to do. And it was obviously beneficial for him to go out there to take part in competitive training sessions. If Martinez had stayed behind at Carrington, he would have just been working with youngsters and doing some gym work. So it was probably a very sensible decision to allow Martinez to go out there and link up with the national side. Again, he didn't play. He wasn't officially in the squad, but he went out there to train. So I'd expect Martinez to be back in the squad this weekend, well, Monday night against Everton. And then obviously there's a slight question mark over Kobbie Mainoo as well, who had a knock against Tottenham. He picked that up in training, so he was absent in the capital just before the break. But again, that was not serious, so I'm expecting him to be back in the squad as well. But with Sesko, I think he'll be absent against Everton, and perhaps it'll be a fortnight before we see him again. But again, I'll stress we'll have to wait and see what Amorim says this afternoon.
Yeah, and just on Martinez, I wrote earlier this week about his role in the club compared to where it was in February when he came off injured against Crystal Palace. It's probably changed dramatically, and maybe for the unexpected as well, considering how well Luke Shaw's done. If we get to the point, and we should get to the point where Martinez and Shaw are both fit at the same time, you've got to say at the moment it's probably Shaw who's going to keep his place.
Yeah, especially after a serious knee injury. He's coming back from injury that no player wants to pick up. Obviously suffered that against Crystal Palace at the beginning of February. So he's been out for 9 months. That is a long time. It's mentally challenging as well as physically challenging. And Martinez has dealt with a few of these injuries now. During his time at the club, he's shown great resilience to come back, and he'll have to show that resilience to reclaim his starting place because, as you've said, Luke Shaw is playing very well. If you ignore the Manchester City game, and I said this on a recent podcast, I think Luke Shaw's actually had a very good season. That was a bad blip. It was a bad performance, but he's actually performed very good away from the Manchester derby in September. So yeah, Martinez won't slot straight back into the team, but that's going to be expected because he's coming back from a serious injury. But once he gets back up to speed, and again, he'll be gradually bedding in, I'd imagine, it'll be interesting to see who keeps that spot because Shaw's played so well. And I think Martinez probably has a few questions to answer. obviously last winter he scored important goals at Anfield against Liverpool, and he scored against Fulham at Craven Cottage. There's a bit of fortune there because it was a deflected effort, but nonetheless it was the match winner. And he was providing some quality in the final third, and we all know what he can do with the ball at his feet, breaking the lines with his passing, and that makes him a bit of a unique option. But I'm not sure he's been at the level of his first season, really, since then. He was obviously fantastic after coming in from Ajax, but fractured his metatarsal at the end of that campaign, and he's dealt with little injury problems and some serious injury problems with his knee since. So I'd love to see Martinez get back up to that level. And he is obviously still very popular with fans, but I'm not so sure that he has been the same player as we saw in that first season. There's obviously been some very good performances since, but whether or not he could sustain that over a longer period, over the course of a season, for example, is up for debate. So Martinez has got something to prove, really. He's 27 years old now, so it'd be interesting to see how he performs when he's back.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a big 18 months or so for him, isn't it, as well, with his contract expiring in 2027. It's kind of you wouldn't want to say make or break, but really he's got to sort of stake his claim and earn that new contract.
Well, yeah, and you can't be going giving out contracts willy-nilly. But look, these players are paid very well. They earn these contracts. And if Martinez is still not showing his peak levels for the rest of the season, for example, and maybe he's playing roles from off the bench, maybe Shaw keeps his place. Maybe perhaps Martinez picks up another injury, hopefully not. Hopefully he stays fit. But that will all be factored into a contract decision. And look, United need to be ruthless. I think I said that about Casemiro, even though he's performing well. And he's become so important again. In my opinion, I still believe he should be let go at the end of the season. He's 33 years old. He's going to be 34 in, I think it's February time. It's after the new year. So before the end of the season anyways, Casemiro will be 34. I'm not sure he should be given a new contract to a 34-year-old player.
And just finally then, before we head into the halftime break, the academy has come up again. Ruben Amorim was speaking to the Premier League this week to mark his first year in charge of the club. And he made some interesting comments about selling players, and particularly academy players who might not make the grade, didn't he, to stay?
Yeah, I thought it was actually quite interesting. Amorim had spoke to club media to look back on his first year in charge, and he'd spoken to a few other outlets, Stan Sports, which I believe is an Australian broadcaster. So I think I was watching the video. I think the interview it was 2 a.m. Australia time, speaking to Amorim. So I bet that was fun for whoever did that. But yeah, one of the headlines from that specific interview for me was Amorim's discussion about young players and kind of what he looks for in young players. And it was interesting to hear him say that sometimes they have too much too soon, and the club need to help these young players deal with the media pressure more in the spotlight, but they also can't be part of it, as in when a player makes a senior debut, that's when the real hard work starts. They've not made it at that point. So from the conversations I've had with people over the last 18 months, that chimes with what I've been told. Amorim is very keen to set high standards. I think some people have felt he's perhaps not give young players as many chances as he should have, but Amorim also said that he actually found it really tough last year when he came into the club because of the situation United were in. He needed results, he needed them quickly, and he didn't have time to really give much thought about the academy, to look at the young players and make plans for their futures. He's obviously been at the football club for a lot longer now, and that is a huge part of his role. But as you've said, in the last few years, or the last 10 years really, I think it was 2015 or 2016, that PSR was really ramped up. The selling of academy players has become increasingly important, and it is clearly an area for improvement at United. Nick Cox raised £100 million during his 6 years as head of the academy, but I know for a fact that the club have looked at the academy and they want to improve the number of sales they make and the fees that they obtain. Jason Wilcox has decided that. Obviously, Stephen Topi has come in from Brentford. He is the new head of the academy. He actually did his first interview. He can speak, apparently. He did his first interview during the international break with club media spoke for around an hour on a podcast, and he discussed kind of improving the club's facilities, and that's the conversations have been ongoing about that over the last 6 weeks or so. But selling players will be important. That's a huge part of Topi's job. It's a big part of his remit, and he'll have to increase that. But bottom line is United obviously still need to produce players for the first team. That should be the priority. This club, as I've said a few times now, has been built on giving young players opportunities. That shouldn't be lost. It's the identity of the club. It's supposedly the beating heart. One of the things to be proudest about. So that can't be lost. I think there's been a lot of the club's identity being slightly damaged over the last 18 months with Sir Jim Ratcliffe's changes, and I think the academy is hugely important, and it needs to be looked after. So hopefully young players are still given opportunities, but again they've got to be good enough. Yeah,
and it's how big a part do you feel it is that the academy facilities are improved? I mean, I think Ratcliffe said that standards had slipped, and I think it's kind of common knowledge now that wasn't necessarily aimed at the players, but more at the facilities in which they train at Carrington. How big do you feel that is with the improvements to the facilities that could then stem to more young players breaking into the first team picture?
Yeah, I'm not sure Sir Jim Ratcliffe was exclusively referring to the facilities with that comment, but that's up for debate. The facilities need improved. The first team were obviously sharing the academy building while the main building was being refurbished. But from what I've seen, anyways, I've obviously been in the academy building for a few times. I wouldn't call it a declining facility at all. It's pretty decent. There's obviously room for improvement. Of course, there is. There always is. But look, United are looking after that area now. They were waiting for Stephen Topi to come in before pushing ahead, because he's obviously going to have a huge influence on how that project will look. So they're going to invest in that area. The first team building's been refurbished. The women of their buildings being refurbished, and now obviously the academy that is going to be improved. So that will help. Of course, it will. Better facilities has to be a positive. But I think Ratcliffe's comment was, I mean, I disagreed with it personally. When you look at what Nick Cox had achieved during his 6 years as head of the academy, some brilliant youth signings, an FA Youth Cup in 21-22, a lot of debuts, a lot of players around the first team and helping the first team. So obviously that kind of started with Nicky Butt and the academy, and Nick Cox picked up the baton and took it to another level. So there's been a lot of good work in the last 6 or 7 years, 8 years, after a period of stagnation in the academy. So I don't think it's as much as a problem as Ratcliffe seemed to suggest it was. I mean, it's been the only functioning part of the club in the last 10 years.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for joining us so far. We're going to take a short break there, and when we come back, we'll be discussing the Everton game. Hello and welcome back to the Manchester's Red podcast. Now, it's a Monday game. We're going to have to wait for it this week with United, but they welcome Everton, who were 3 points behind them in the table. It's a good chance this week, isn't it, Steve, for United to get back into the swing of things with 3 points?
It is, yeah. Undefeated in 5, 3 wins in October. Obviously started November with draws against Nottingham Forest and Tottenham. We discussed those games after the results and agreed that United should have done better, because obviously they'd taken the lead in both those matches. But look, they did well in the end to salvage points in both games because they scored late goals. So again, if you can't win, don't lose. So look, undefeated in 5 now. Obviously, finally built some momentum in October, which was fantastic. But we discussed there's still a lot to do, particularly with the defensive record. Just a reminder that obviously Arsenal have conceded 5, City have conceded 8, Chelsea have conceded 11, Sunderland, Tottenham and Aston Villa have all conceded 10. Those are the teams currently above United in the table. United have conceded 18. So there's clear room for improvement with the defensive record. Amram's admitted that himself, and they need to tighten up the back line. And the good news is that Everton can't score for toffee.
Oh, very good.
Thank you. Thank you for the applause and they've scored 12 goals. but they'd won 2-0 against Fulham before the international break. Before that, they'd scored 10 and 10. I watched them against Sunderland. They were really impressive in the first half. I think they're actually better in games when they don't have to have possession. Naturally, they can counter-attack, and that was one of those matches, because I think Sunderland have tried to have more of the ball since they've been promoted, against the lower sides anyways. So Everton were really good in that game, but the standard of their finishing was comical. They've had this battle between Beto and Barry. It's been the battle of the idiots, really. Neither look very good at all. They don't look cut out for the Premier League. By all accounts, I think there was some green shoots from Barry against Fulham. I think he looked a little bit better, but I don't think you'll come up against two worst strikers, really, in the Premier League. It sounds harsh, but it's true. I think that they're really bad. So look, there's a huge opportunity there to keep a clean sheet. I'm going to say this weekend, but obviously the game is on Monday. I always bang on about how under the floodlights, I think it gives United an advantage at home, because the crowd's up for it. The new rail seating in the Stretford end is going to be officially opened as well. That'll help the atmosphere. United have got a big opportunity to get on the front foot to really take the game to Everton. And there's no excuse not to be winning games like this. Look, Everton will be well organised. They should be hard to break down. But if United are going to qualify for the Champions League, they need to be beating teams like this. David Moyes has done a decent job, but I think there's been some question marks this season. I'm not exactly sure what Everton fans expect with the talent they've got, particularly at the top of the field. As I've said, they need a goal scorer and they don't. So I'm not sure they've exactly got the firepower to hurt United, although look, they've got Grealish, they've got Ndiaye. Those are creative players. They will pop up and do something eventually. But you look, United are tight at the back of the moment, they should be tight at the back of the moment, because they've got the talent, which is what we've talked about. It's a bit weird, isn't it? It's because you look at the defensive department and you'd probably say it's the strongest area in the squad, and yet we're talking about it as the area for improvement now. So I'd like to see them keep a clean sheet on Monday, and hopefully secure a convincing win.
Yeah, and just speaking about that defensive department, obviously on the left-hand side, the left wing-back role, it's either going to be Patrick Dorgu, you'd imagine, or Diogo Dalot. Who do you see probably getting the nod on Monday? I keep trying to say this weekend, but yes, on Monday. Obviously, Dorgu got his goal during the international break against Scotland. It was a losing effort in the end. You'd imagine, from my perspective, he probably keeps his place, doesn't he?
I'm not sure who tweeted this, but I remember the tweet because I laughed at it. And it went around, I think, after the Tottenham game before that match. And it said, when I watch Patrick Dorgu start, I want Diogo Dalot to start. When I watch Dalot starting, I want Patrick Dorgu to start. I think that probably sums it up this season so far. Obviously, Dorgu started as first choice at left wing back. He started the campaign with that role. Was eventually taken out of the team during a very good October. Dalot started in that run, but obviously did the long throw-ins against Sunderland, but he was pretty disappointing in that performance. I thought he was good against Liverpool, a bit of a shaky start, but ended that game well. Then he really regressed against Nottingham Forest. So it was no surprise to see Dorgu come into the team against Tottenham. But I don't think there's a perfect option at the moment on that side. Obviously, on the opposite side, on the right, Ahmad's really made that role his own. He's looked excellent at right wing back, but Amrim's having a bit more of a headache at left wing back. To be fair, Dalot, and I think again, I'll keep stressing this point, he's more comfortable on the right. Clearly, again, he'll hold his hands up and he'll say, "Look, I'll play anywhere," because that's the kind of character that he is. But he's definitely better on the right, and I think he's struggled a bit on the left. That's not helping him give the best account of himself each week. But I think Dorgu will start, after coming into the side against Tottenham. And I've got a suspicion that he's a bit of a confidence player, really, Dorgu. As you said, he scored against Scotland during the international break. Obviously, Denmark lost that game 4-2 after Scott McTominay opened the scoring, didn't he? But it was a crazy ending to that game. It was brilliant to watch. I was actually in town watching that match. There's a few Scots in the bar going crazy. So I think that should give Dorgu some confidence returning from the international break that he found the back of the net. He started twice for Denmark. He hadn't played in the last international break, hadn't started. And it can be an opportunity for him to kick on now. And he's got a chance there to make that position his own if he performs well. But we've just seen a few unconvincing displays, and that's why Ruben Amorim has been inclined to bring Diego Dallo into the team on the left. But look, Dorgu's young. He's got all the kind of the assets to eventually become a very good player. I think you can see that when you watch him. He's got a lot of kind of his athleticism's really good down the left. He's got a really good engine, and I think to play in the wing back role you need that engine. But I think he lets himself down when he gets himself into the final third. Think how often he gets in dangerous areas and how often the cross is disappointing. Sometimes I'm not sure whether he just doesn't get his head up and he can't pick out the right cross, or whether he rushes it when he gets into those areas. If you think back to the Manchester City game in the derby, I think Dorgu must have picked up the ball in great areas half a dozen times, and I can't recall a decent ball going into the box. So it's the biggest area of his game that he needs to improve, biggest area for improvement. He really needs to kind of polish his balls into the box in the final third, and perhaps look that goal against Scotland will do him the world of good, and hopefully he'll kick on. But yeah, I agree. I think he'll get the nod against Everton on Monday night, not this weekend.
Yes, and another sort of headache for Ruben Amorim going into this one is if, as we expect, Benjamin Sesko is not going to be available, there's a decision to be made about how the front three looks against Everton. We're kind of under the impression that Joshua Zirkzee is not going to really be in that conversation. Obviously, against exactly against Spurs, it was Ahmad and Mbeumo behind Cunha. Obviously, the other person to add into that mix is Mason Mount. Where do you see that one sort of going?
I actually think Ahmad looked better against Tottenham when he was relocated to right wing back in the second half. Obviously, he did assist Brian Mbeumo in the first half when he's further up the pitch. But that would be the natural solution to me, to drop Ahmad back to right wing back, and then I'd play Mason Mount personally. I'd give him the nod. So Mount, Cunha and Mbeumo as the front three. Mount was actually very good when he came on against Tottenham. He was responsible for creating both chances for Sesko that was scrutinised a bit after the game. And look, Sesko should have done better. If you remember when Van der Ven recovered, he should have hit it first time or come in on the other side. We've talked about that. But it was a bright cameo from Mount. He's been very good in the first few weeks of the season. He obviously played as part of that kind of fluid front three. Started at Anfield, that was more industrious. He had to work hard, perhaps not as much quality going forward, but he was still an important cog of that system at Anfield on that day. So yeah, I'd like to see Mount return to the team personally. But as you've said, Ruben Amorim does have options. You look at Kobbie Mainoo and Joshua Zirkzee. They will like to think this could be an opening for either of them. Zirkzee, I just can't see starting, if I'm honest, down the middle. I think Amorim has shown he'd much rather have Mason Mount start. I think Zirkzee would have played by now if Amorim had fancied him. He's not been given a single start all season. He's played just 90 minutes across 5 appearances. So Zirkzee, again, will probably be looking at that January window. He won't be counting down till Christmas. He'll be counting down the days until the January transfer window. And perhaps Mainoo will be given a chance, because I guess there's a possibility of moving Bruno Fernandes further forward. But again, I think it's more likely that Ruben Amorim goes with Mason Mount and keeps Fernandes and Casemiro in the midfield positions. I think that is far more likely. But there is potential there to play Mainoo and Casemiro in midfield to push Fernandes into one of the number 10 roles, and obviously alongside Cunha and Mbeumo. That would be really interesting if that happens. I just can't see it happening, unfortunately.
Yeah, it would be interesting, particularly because it feels like Fernandes does excel further forward. You see, Casemiro's done a really good job, I think, this season of sort of holding back and allowing Fernandes to get involved in the sort of attacking build-up. But you've got to think that Bruno, if he was given the option, and once again, he's another one of those players, isn't he, that will just play anywhere for the manager, wherever he's asked. But if he was allowed the option, he'd probably say, yeah, I'd rather be in that number 10 role alongside Mbeumo, wouldn't he?
Yeah, 100%. Fernandes would, I think, snap your hand off for that. although again he tends to perform wherever he plays. That's a credit to Fernandez. I thought earlier in the season it wasn't working, but look, it was a fantastic spell in October with Fernandez in the deeper role. So that made me look a bit daft because I thought it was probably time to relocate him and push him back up the pitch. But it has worked. It did work in October. Some great wins. But there is an option there to play Mainoo. It's been on Amram to make it work with Kobbie Mainoo. And I think I recorded the podcast with David a few months ago, and it seemed like we're discussing Mainoo every week. And I was becoming conscious of that, and you can't really talk about a player every week who's just coming off the bench. But it was a huge talking point in the first few weeks of the season because I think everyone could see the direction it was heading in. And look, it's almost December now. I think we can confidently say that Mainoo will probably want to leave again in January. I was told 2.5 months ago that the World Cup was a huge motivator from this season. Obviously, if you put yourself in Mainoo's shoes, he's played at the Euro 2024 final, started in that game against Spain, and now he's not even in the England squad, and he's looking very likely to miss out in the World Cup. So for him, that represents career regression. He's not playing for his club, and he's good enough to be playing for a top side. It's just another matter of whether United will entertain another request to leave on loan in the January transfer window. That's probably going to be unlikely because the squad in that area is not that deep. If they suffer an injury to Bruno Fernandes, look, he doesn't get injured very often, but it's obviously possible. United need Mainoo in the squad. They see him as a very important squad player. So it's difficult. It might just be a case of, unfortunately for Kobbie Mainoo, of sucking it up and kind of continuing to get his head down for the rest of the season. It's a great shame because he's such a talent. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that talent each week. And it's a joy to watch Mainoo when he's at his best. We all saw what he could do. He scored in the FA Cup final. His breakout season, he was tremendous. I've followed them for even longer before that, going up and down the country in some Papa John games. I distinctly remember going to Fleetwood, and he was fantastic in that game a few years back. So he's been a joy to watch, a joy to report on in the last few years. But this season is really disappointing for Mainoo. And again, the situation hasn't changed. So that January window will be an opportunity to go through the door. But I can't see it happening again. I can't see United entertaining the request.
Yeah, and just on that January window, could you potentially see Joshua Zirkzee getting the nod, and maybe United then are going to have to delve in and try and sign a striker? I mean, there's talk about Antoine Semenyo at Bournemouth having a £65 million release clause. He's possibly the sort of player that United might want to look at if Zirkzee is to go. But can you see them entertaining that one just because he seems a bit more out of the picture than Mainoo?
Yeah, I'd rule out Semenyo at this stage. Anyways, they've just splashed over 120 odd million on Burmo and Kuna, players of very similar profiles. So I'd say that's incredibly unlikely at this stage, and especially not in the January transfer window. But between Mainoo and Zirkzee, in regard to January, I'd probably say Zirkzee's more likely. He's obviously played fewer minutes, although it's not exactly too much of a battle. They've both hardly played. But you've got Sesko there. Mason Mount has obviously been playing there. And Zirkzee is he's just really not getting a kick at all, is he? I could see Mainoo potentially being used a bit more maybe at the end of the season than Zirkzee. I think he's got a slightly better chance, I'll say slightly. So perhaps Zirkzee will be the one who leaves. Perhaps there'll be new signing made in that department. Ruben Amorim admitted that, look, depending on Sesko's injury and with AFCON coming up, they could look at it in the January window. But I think Sesko's only going to be probably around 3 weeks. Again, we'll wait and see what Amorim says. But I'd say Zirkzee's probably the likelier of the pair to leave.
Yeah, well, on that note then, thank you once again, Steve, for joining me. We'll have all of the latest news once this comes out from Amorim's press conference, so you'll be able to catch that all over on the Manchester Evening News website. And then building up to the game on Sunday, you'll have all the normal stuff and updates in our live blog. So yes, and next week we'll catch you again to go over it all.